games fans, this is Andy C from Piece of 8-Bit. Welcome to this week's video, and this week it is the end of the month with, and for the last 4 weeks I have been living with this, the Amiga 500, or more importantly the Amiga 500 Plus actually, which is a slightly enhanced version, which we'll talk about later on. Yeah, today's video, the purpose of it is, for anybody who's seen the month with before, you will know, is basically I will talk a little bit about the history of the Amiga and Commodore, as I do with any console or machine that I play with. And then I will tell you a little bit about the hardware specifications. All of the chapters are also below as well, so if there's any parts that you're not interested in, you just want to get to the verdict or whatever it happens to be, I won't take offense, I promise. Just skip to the end to have a look. But if you are interested, obviously stick with me. Yeah, we're talking about the hardware, and there's a bit of a history lesson in there. It's going to be slightly different to normal. Normally I compare one console with another console. Obviously we won't be doing that this time round. So I'll just give you a little bit of a background as to why the hardware made the Amiga so unique and kind of special. So we'll be talking about that. I'll also be telling you what games I've been playing throughout the month, which is kind of my favourite part really. That's the fun bit. I'll tell you how you can get back into Amiga gaming in 2026 through emulators and other methods. We'll get on to that, of course, and then I will tell you what it has actually been like to live with this nearly 40-year-old machine behind me here for the last 4 weeks. And of course, at the end of all of that, I will tell you what is coming up through July in my next month with installment. So, lots and lots of things to cover. Before we dive into that, I just very quickly want to say one of the reasons why I'm a little bit sad that the month with is ending for the Amiga. Not only have I really enjoyed it, but also, spoiler alert, but also I've also really enjoyed the engagement. So love it or hate it, the engagement has been incredible. Some of my most popular videos that I've ever made for the channel. It's brought me loads of new subscribers. So welcome to anybody who's watching this who's recently subscribed to the channel. Obviously, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoy anything on the channel. Please do. Really appreciate your support. But yes, thank you so much for all the engagement. Loads and loads of comments to sift through. If you haven't had a response from me yet, I am trying to get through all the comments, although my policy of responding to everything is proving to be somewhat difficult when I've got hundreds of comments to respond to. But I do try and read everybody's comment and try and respond to everybody as best I can. Sometimes it might be short just because literally so many people have responded, and some people spend so much time writing such a really nice, thought out, lengthy responses to the videos, which is great. Sometimes they're disagreeing with what I say, and that's absolutely fine too. Lovely to hear everybody's opinions and thoughts, memories, all of those kind of things. So I've said enough. There's a lot to get through, so let's dive into our first section and let's talk briefly about the history of the Amiga, how it came to be, and yeah, a little bit of Commodore and yeah, it's a bit of a woeful tale, but let's dive in and have a look. So, as with all the month with reviews, I like to take a look back at the origin story. So let's take a look at where this remarkable machine came from, how it changed the gaming industry, and why so many people still talk about it with such affection more than 40 years later. Now, the story of the Amiga actually begins a little while before the Amiga 500, in fact, and it didn't start with Commodore either. In the 1980s, a small American company called the Amiga Corporation was working on an ambitious new home computer. The team included several former Atari engineers and was led by a visionary designer named Jay Miner, often referred to as the father of the Amiga. The goal? Simple, I guess, but incredibly ambitious. Create a machine that was years ahead of anything else on the market. At the time, most home computers were pretty limited. We had machines like the ZX Spectrum, the Commodore 64, the Atari 800. They were all hugely successful, but they all had pretty significant technical limitations. What the Amiga team wanted to do was something different then. They wanted advanced graphics, professional quality sound, powerful multitasking capabilities, all in a machine that ordinary people could still ultimately afford, which is not entirely dissimilar to the vision that Sir Clive Sinclair had with the ZX Spectrum a few years before. Financial difficulties unfortunately nearly killed the project before it even came to the market, but in 1984 the company was acquired by Commodore International. And this gave the team the resources they needed to be able to complete development. As a result, the launch of the Amiga 1000 happened in 1985. And when it arrived, well, it felt genuinely like a machine from the future. We discussed this last week about how the Amiga really changed the home computer landscape. And to us kids in the 80s, it seemed like space age technology. We asked back last week whether it really was ahead of its time, and for many of us, that was a pretty clear and easy yes, and you can see that in the comments. Not everybody agreed, to be truthful to you, but in the 1980s, I thought it was utterly space age. Now, whilst many computers were still displaying pretty simple graphics and basic sound effects, the Amiga offered thousands of colours, advanced custom graphics chips, 4-channel stereo sound, and preemptive multitasking, which we spoke about last week. These are features really that we wouldn't see as commonplace on PCs for some years. So you could be editing graphics, playing music, running multiple applications simultaneously on a machine in the mid-80s. Just think about that for a second. It was extraordinary. But despite its technical brilliance, it wasn't the Amiga 1000 that would be the machine that most people will remember. Of course, that honour unsurprisingly belongs to the Amiga 500, or this one's sort of older, slightly less powerful brother, I guess, released in 1987. The Amiga 500 struck the perfect balance between price and performance, and it brought all of the technological magic of the Amiga platform to a much wider audience and quickly became one of the most popular home computers ever released in Europe. And nowhere embraced the Amiga more enthusiastically than here in Europe, and I remember just how much of an impact it had here, right here in the UK in fact. Part of that, I think, came down to timing. Britain in particular had already got a strong home computer culture, thanks in part, well not even in part, but thanks specifically to machines like the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, the Amstrad CPC, and of course Commodore's own Commodore 64. And in schools we had the Acorn machines, which were also very popular, with the BBC Micros initially and then the Archimedes later on. So British gamers were used to buying computers rather than consoles, and many young people were not just playing games, but they were also creating them. Now, the Amiga arrived then at exactly the right moment. It became the machine of the bedroom programmer, the aspiring artist, the musician, and of course, the gamer, spawning, as we know now, the legendary Amiga demo scene. Through the late 80s and into the 90s, the Amiga became home to some of the most talented developers in the industry. There's a load of them. Studios like Team 17, Sensible Software, Bitmap Brothers, DMA Design, Psygnosis, Bullfrog, Codemasters, many others pushed the hardware to its limits, creating experiences that often looked and sounded years ahead of the competition. And that's one of the reasons why we've spent this month playing so many incredible games, so many to list. We've looked at Lemmings, we've looked at Cannon Fodder, Alien Breed, Stunt Car Racer. On the side, I've also been playing Lotus Turbo Challenge 2, Sensible Soccer, Chaos Engine, Another World. The list goes on. Monkey Island, gosh, how could you forget Monkey Island? The list just goes on and on and on. The Amiga wasn't just receiving great games. In many cases, it was receiving the definitive version before it was ported onto consoles and other machines. And its influence stretched far beyond gaming too. As we've discussed before, a machine found its way into music production, television studios, and video editing suites. And in fact, Amigas were used extensively in television production throughout the late 80s and into the early 90s. Particularly thanks, of course, to the revolutionary and amusingly titled video toaster system. And if you remember Babylon 5, you'll know that the CGI was rendered on an Amiga. A very specialist Amiga, but it was rendered on an Amiga. Something which Amiga fans love to tell people, of course. And for a brief period, it genuinely felt as though the Amiga represented the future of personal computing. But unfortunately, being technically superior doesn't always guarantee success. And as we've explored before, as the 1990s progressed, Commodore began making a series of pretty catastrophic strategic mistakes. Whilst competitors were continuing to evolve rapidly, Commodore struggled to communicate exactly what the Amiga was and where it was headed. Was it a games machine, a business computer? Was it a creative workstation? And the marketing often lacked focus, especially across the Atlantic in its homeland. At the same time, we had IBM compatible PCs becoming increasingly more powerful and increasingly more affordable. We had sound cards, VGA graphics, which was a huge deal, and faster processors gradually closed that tech gap that the Amiga had ultimately once enjoyed. And then, of course, there was also the rise of dedicated gaming consoles. The 16-bit era with the Sega Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo had already become hugely successful, and by the mid-1990s, of course, we had the arrival of systems like the Sony PlayStation, which would fundamentally change the gaming landscape forever. Commodore, meanwhile, responded way too slowly. New Amiga models did arrive, but many felt like incremental improvements rather than the dramatic leaps the market demanded, in fact. Financial problems mounted, and then in April 1994, the same year that the PlayStation launched from Sony, of course, Commodore filed for bankruptcy. And it was an incredibly sad year for the company, who also saw the loss of Amiga's visionary founder, Jay Miner, who died just a couple of months later, aged only 62. And just like that, one of the most influential technology companies of the 1980s was gone. That was it. And for many fans, it felt unthinkable. The machine that had once seemed years ahead of its time had been overtaken by changing markets, stronger competition, and poor corporate decisions. But here's the thing. The Amiga didn't really die. Its influence can still be seen today, and many of the developers who cut their teeth creating Amiga games went on to shape the wider games industry. DMA Design, of course, became Rockstar North. You may or may not have heard of them. And many of the design ideas pioneered on the platform became industry standards. And perhaps most importantly, the Amiga inspired an entire generation to create. So for many people, this wasn't just a computer they played games on, it was the first machine they programmed. It was probably, if they were into it, the first machine they made music on. It might have been the first machine that they used to create artwork. And, of course, it was probably the first machine that showed them technology could be something that they could ultimately actively participate in rather than just consume. And that, I think I would say, is why the Amiga remains so special over 40 years later. Because when people talk about the Amiga today, they are rarely talking about the clock speeds, the memory sizes, or the benchmark results. And you can only look through the comments and people say, there were more powerful things out there, with things doing, cooler things at the time. When you look at the hardware, yeah, sure. But we'll all be talking about that in a minute. We'll come to that. But what they're really talking about is the creativity. They're talking about the possibilities that it brought. They're talking about a machine that really made people feel like the future had arrived. And after spending this month revisiting some of the greatest games, I think it's pretty easy to see why. The Amiga wasn't perfect. I'll be accused of being a fanboy. I've been accused of it over this month. I'm not really. I'm not a massive, I'm not a massive fanboy of the Amiga. I do love it. I didn't own one. I had a PC. But for a generation of games and creators and gamers, developers, it changed everything. And that's a legacy few machines can ever really hope to match. And I know that sounds very fanboyistic. And like I said, I had a more powerful PC in the early 90s. On paper, it was far more powerful than the Amiga. And yet I was still very jealous of my friend's Amiga that was 5 or 6 years older. Some of the technology goes back even further than that. And on that topic, let's go and have a look now at the hardware of the Amiga and through its various generations. And you can see actually why it wasn't just a hardware thing. But let's dive straight into that topic right now. Now, normally this is the part of the video where I compare two machines head to head and I decide which one is going to come out on top. Usually consoles from the same generation, whether we look at the N64 versus the PlayStation 1 or the Xbox versus the PlayStation 2. That's normally what we would do. We'd look under the hood and say which one's best, and what the hardware specs and what does what. But this month I thought we'd do something perhaps a little bit different. It's kind of tricky because the Amiga is lots of machines actually, and instead of comparing the Amiga 500 to another system, let's take a look at the machine itself and some of its successors, and explore why this humble beige box became one of the most beloved computers of all time. It's kind of a bit yellow now actually. And at the heart of it all was one of the most famous processors ever made, at least I think it is, and that processor was the Motorola 68000. Now on paper the 68000 doesn't actually sound particularly impressive by modern standards, even by 1980s standards. In the Amiga 500 it ran at just over 7 megahertz, which actually was pretty mediocre. But as we know, clock speed only really tells part of the story. The 68000 featured 32-bit internal registers, a nice clean instruction set and an elegant design that made it far more capable than many of the 8-bit processors it was competing against at the time. What's perhaps even more impressive is that this humble chip actually dates back to 1979, which is wild. Despite being designed in the late 70s though, it remained in production until the mid-1990s, and variants of it are still manufactured even today. That's an incredible lifespan and a testament to just how versatile and well designed this processor was. And it went in loads of machines. The 68000 went on to power everything from Amiga's biggest competitor, the Atari ST, to the Apple Macintosh, to Sega's Mega Drive, and countless arcade machines all over the place had the 68000 processor at their heart. And it's also a processor I actually know quite well myself. Back in my uni days, I developed software for the 68000 in both assembly language and in C. And it was genuinely one of the nicest processors I've ever actually worked with. The instruction set was logical, it was consistent, and it was surprisingly approachable, which is why I think they used it for teaching. And it was a joy to program compared to some of its contemporaries. Intel, I am looking at you. And here's the thing, the Amiga's secret weapon wasn't actually the CPU. What really made the machine special was its collection of rather affectionately named custom chips. And essentially what they did was, rather than force the processor to do everything itself, Commodore designed the Amiga around dedicated hardware that handled the graphics and the sound all separately. It's a concept really that today would seem pretty normal and surprisingly modern for a machine from the mid-80s. Let's have a look at all of these little chips and we'll talk just about what they all did. So the first up was a chip called Agnes, and Agnes was effectively the traffic controller, if you like, of the entire system. Inside Agnes lived two legendary pieces of hardware. We had the Blitter, which we've heard a lot of people talking about when we're talking about sprites in the comments, and the Copper. So the Blitter handled graphics operations such as moving images around memory, whilst the Copper could manipulate display settings as the screen was being drawn, which meant that you could do all sorts of clever visual tricks that became really synonymous with a lot of the Amiga games. Next up was Denise, and this was the graphics chip. I suppose between that and Agnes, that's your GPU, I suppose, in many ways, if you're thinking it in modern terms. Denise gave the Amiga access to a palette of over 4,000 colours at a time when many competing systems were working with a fraction of that, mostly just 16. And the result was vibrant artwork and stunning visuals in games like Shadow of the Beast. And finally, we come to Paula, which is, I think, one of my favourite bits of the Amiga architecture. And for many Amiga fans, Paula is the star of the show. Paula delivered 4 channels of sampled stereo audio, and it allowed developers to use real recorded sounds rather than having to use simple synthesized beeps and tones, which we were quite used to at that point in history. And it helped to create some of the most memorable soundtracks of the era and played a huge role in the rise of tracker music and, of course, the demo scene. Now, the Amiga family itself didn't stand still. Now, it all began obviously, with the Amiga 1000. I'm not sure where they were thinking with this naming, but it started with the 1000 in 1985. And for years, I thought the 1000 came after the 500, because why wouldn't you? But the Amiga 1000 was the first Amiga in 1985, and that was the machine that introduced all of these groundbreaking ideas to the world. Then we had the Amiga 500 in 1987, which brought the technology to a much more affordable audience and became Commodore's biggest success. Still unrivaled for Commodore to this day, the most popular Amiga ever. The Amiga 500 Plus, which is what this one is, followed, and it was basically just a bit of a facelift really. It had a bit of additional memory, so it went from 512K to 1 megabyte, and it had a refined chipset. The 600, which came after that, introduced features such as built-in IDE support for hard drives, and although its reception was somewhat mixed among enthusiasts, it removed the number pad and all those sort of things, but was compact. And then later in 1992 came the Amiga 1200, which brought a faster processor and the new Advanced Graphics Adapter ARGA graphics chipset, and this represented a big leap forward for Commodore. Commodore even entered the console market with the CD32 in 1993. Essentially, it was a 1200 but had a CD-ROM built into it, and for a brief while it became Europe's best-selling CD-based console before Commodore's financial troubles brought the story to a rather abrupt end. Alongside these home machines were the professional Amigas, of course, the 2000, the 3000, and finally the 4000, which found success in video production, graphics design, and business environments. But looking back, what strikes me the most isn't any individual component. It's how all of these pieces ultimately fitted together and worked together. We had the 68000, we had the Agnes, the Denise, and of course the Paula. And all of these things together really was a testament of all of the parts perhaps being a little more than their sum, I suppose. Of course, let's not forget the Blitter and the copper as well, which sat in there. Individually, they were very, very impressive indeed, and together they created something really rather special. Right, now I normally say the games make the console, of course, but this isn't a console. This is a personal computer. So yeah, but do I think the games make the console or the machine? Yes and no. I think yes in many ways, but you did have to sift through a lot of nonsense on the Amiga. There was a lot of copying and a lot of weird games going on, and a lot of the big publishers stayed away because there was a lot of piracy on the Amiga as well. It was very easy to copy the games. But there were some absolute gems. We'll talk about those in just a second. Did it make the machine? I don't think it did, actually. I think so much more made the Amiga than just games, because it was so creative and you could do the music and the demo scene and all of those kind of things made the Amiga. That's what made the Amiga special. It wasn't just games. That was just a part of it. So I think for the first time in a while, I think the answer to the question, do the games make the console? I think, well, one, not a console. Two, a machine. Answer, probably not. Big part, yes. Certainly a big part for me personally. But I don't think they were the only thing that really defined the Amiga. Certainly not the 500 anyway. So let's talk about some of the games. Nonetheless, they are amazing. Some of the games are amazing. And like I say, there are thousands of games on the Amiga. And most of it, I would say, is probably not that good, actually. I've seen it, you know, I've got the full library of Amiga games. There's loads of games in there, most of which I've never heard before. But there are some, if you sift amongst the nonsense, the games that you find, the gems, the ones that are well known, are amazing. So what have I been playing this month? Now I've got to try and rack my brains now, because I haven't written it down on my board rather foolishly, so I've got to try and remember this from my brain. Well, we played Lemmings, one of my absolute favourite games anyway. It's just an amazing game. Had a good go at Lemmings, really, really fantastic game. Love the idea of it, and of course DMA Design, later Rockstar, were responsible for that. We had a bit of a go at Stunt Car Racer, which was a 1980s game, would you believe, which was one of the first games that I ever saw that used polygon 3D graphics, which was pretty cool. Really enjoyed playing that. Remember just how difficult it was. Last week we looked at Alien Breed. That was good fun as well. That is also really, really hard. it was quite hard to get it to run on the emulator as well. More on that in a moment. Yeah, I had a really good go at that. That is a fantastic game. Spawned a whole franchise of games, really, and really did establish Team 17 as a big old game player, especially when Worms arrived later on. They were already established from Alien Breed, and it was just, you know, it was just glory for them, really. Many people would argue that they've perhaps lost their mojo in recent years, but certainly back then they were fantastic. We played Magic Pockets, which I think is a bit of an unloved classic. I think people have forgotten a lot about that game. Absolutely brilliant. I love that soundtrack at the beginning. It's absolutely brilliant, and it's a really fun, very typical Bitmap Brothers sort of a game. So those are the games I think we looked at on the Bit Between. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in the Bit Between we've had a look at. I can't think of anything else, but also been playing lots of others as well. Had a bit of a go of SimCity, the original SimCity on the Amiga, which is great with a mouse. Trying to play that on the SNES, on the NES in fact, actually, is nowhere near as much fun. I played a bit of Zool. Played a bit of Another World. That is an amazing game. That is an amazing game. And I don't think it was actually Bit Between. I think it was before I called it the Bit Between, but we had a look at that game a while ago. Another game that I also had a look at a while ago, but had another go of, was Moonstone, and I forgot just how utterly terrible I still am at that game. Go back and check my video out from ages ago when I had a look at Moonstone. What else? Played a bit of Monkey Island, of course. No month would be complete without a bit of Monkey Island. Oh, and of course, the sports game. So we had Sensible Soccer, which feels like a good time to be playing that at the moment in the World Cup. Fantastic, fantastic game. And of course, Speedball 2 Brutal Deluxe, which is one of my favourite sports games. It's just brilliant. In fact, that and Sensible Soccer are two of my favourite sports games, period. They are just absolutely brilliant. The first from Sensible Software, the second from Bitmap Brothers. Absolutely brilliant games. Absolutely adore those. Bit of Lotus Turbo Challenge 2, which is my favourite of the Lotus Turbo Challenge games. Everyone kind of has their favourite, usually between 1 or 2. 2 is my favourite personally. Bit more arcadey, bit more outrun style of sort of a game. I do really love that. I think that's everything I've played. I mean, there's been so much. I have played so much. And there's games that I haven't played that I wanted to play that I just haven't had time to play. Xenon 2 is another one. Never got round to playing Xenon 2. Another Bitmap Brothers game. Got a nice little soundtrack to it. Nice style and vibe to it. Quite a lovely little game, that. Bit of Theme Park, which I briefly touched on but never really played. So there's just so much. And there's so many games I remember from back then that I would have loved to have played a little bit more of. What else could we have played? Wings is another game I never quite got round to. That's another really fun game, sort of flying little kind of World War I biplanes around and shooting each other down in dogfights. That's quite fun too. Oh, and how could I forget, of course, Cannon Fodder. And I did that in the Bit Between last week, actually. I nearly forgot that. That is one of the best games on the Amiga. It's absolutely fantastic. Oh, and there's still more. Chaos Engine, and I played a bit of Chaos Engine and Syndicate as well. Gosh, how did I play so many games? How have I fitted that all in? I don't know. Most things I've only played for like a short time. Some games I've played for a bit longer, like Lemmings. Some of the stuff I've been doing in the Bit Between, played those games obviously for a bit longer. But yeah, loads and loads of games, and what classics all of those games are that I've just listed. They're all amazing in their own way and in their own right, and so many of those games, the definitive versions, are on the Amiga. And I didn't even mention James Pond because I didn't even get around to playing that, although that game plays quite well on most platforms actually. So there you go. Oh, breathe. Loads of amazing games. So if you like the sound of any of those games, obviously go back and check out some of the ones that I played on the Bit Between, and some of the games I also played quite a long while ago on the equivalent feature a while back. So go check out some of those videos if you want to have a look at them. But if you really do want to have a look at some of those games again, then I'm going to tell you in the next section how you can get back into Amiga gaming in 2026. So stay tuned and I will tell you all about it in the next section. Now, how can you get back into Amiga gaming in 2026? If you enjoyed that last part there and you were thinking, oh gosh, I remember all of those games, I'd love to get back into some of those. Well, this is the section where I can tell you how you can do that. Now, in most videos that I do, when I talk about getting back into a particular console, certainly up to, I would say, the PS2 era, it's quite easy. There are emulators out there, they are well established, and they're nice and easy to use in things like Launchbox or OpenEMU on the Mac, things like that, and also on the Raspberry Pi. Quite easy to get into, very easy to set up. You typically don't even need to unzip most of the files. You put them in there and it just deals with all of it. It's very, very straightforward. As you start to get into the newer era, we start to find it a little bit more tricky. So Xbox 360 era and PlayStation 3 can be a little bit trickier to emulate and can be a little bit problematic. GameCube can be a little bit of a nuisance as well. But generally speaking, there are still emulators that you can use to do it. The Amiga, despite being a machine from the 1980s, isn't so straightforward to emulate. And part of the reason for that is because it is a full-blown computer. So you actually need to run the operating system essentially first before you run any of the games. So there are a few ways that you can get back into Amiga games. So let's just cover the emulators first, because that's what we were talking about. So there are emulators around. There's a couple of sort of main ones that I have encountered. Now I've got a Mac set up, so I've used the Mac versions of them. There is something called FS-UAE emulator, which is the Mac emulator for the Amiga, and there is WinUAE, which you can obviously use on Windows. Those emulators are pretty good for the most part. I have personally had a little bit of trouble with them, mainly for recording actually. So I've had trouble getting sound out from some of the games on there for reasons that I cannot to this day fathom. I can't figure out why some of that it just isn't working. It just isn't working. So I've had to find other ways of emulating the games. The reason I emulate games is because if I try and plug the machine into the computer and then record off there, you get lag, and then it makes the games difficult to play. So I like to emulate just purely for the purposes of recording. So there's those two emulators there. On the Mac, there's also something called vAmiga, which actually is quite good. I had a bit of a play with that as well. And then if you're using the Raspberry Pi, you've got things like AmiBerry. Now, Raspberry Pi Amiga emulation, I find actually is not that good. Well, it's not that it's not that good, it's just a bit of a fiddle. And I think unless you've got a Raspberry Pi set up with a keyboard and mouse, I just wouldn't bother trying to emulate Amiga games on a Raspberry Pi. You know, if you're trying to make a little mini console with a gamepad on it, just don't bother, because it's a nuisance. You need a keyboard really for an Amiga to be able for it to work well. So I would stick with the emulators on a PC or a Mac. Where they become complicated is that a lot of the games require additional memory. Because we're talking about a whole family of computers here and not just one particular console, there's lots of settings that you need. So some games might need a bit more memory, some games might need a different core, and the most important thing to remember is that you also need the operating system, which I mentioned before. Now, if you think about it, when you buy a PC, you need to have a licensed copy of Windows on it. Amigas were no different back in the day. You would have something called Workbench, and Workbench is copyright, so you can't just start an emulator up and it just work. Now, there is an exception to that. When I was using vAmiga, it comes with a sort of a version. It's not Workbench, but it's an Amiga compatible operating system that will allow you to play the Amiga game. So you can do that if you want to. I've had mixed results with that. Some things work fine, other things I've just don't seem to work quite how I expect them to. So if you want the actual genuine Kickstart ROMs, which is what they're called, you can actually go and find them. There are places out there. I think if you go to Lemon Amiga, I think it points you in the right direction. You can actually buy them. Oh, it's Amiga Forever, actually. If you go to Amiga Forever, you can actually buy the Kickstart ROMs. They're not that expensive, but if you want to do it properly and legitimately, that is where you get them from. That's where I've got them from. You can, of course, go find them from somewhere else if you want to. Even the version of the ROM that you use, so the operating system that you use, will depend on the success of the game. So sometimes you'll find a game, you'll need to then just go check what the settings are that are needed for that game, whether you need more memory, whether you need a different version of the Amiga, whether you need different versions of the ROM set, you know, the Kickstart ROM set. Usually, most things will run on an Amiga 500 with 512K of RAM or 1 meg of RAM with the Kickstart 1.3 ROM. But some want newer, some older games won't work with the newer ROMs, all of those kind of things. So it does require a bit of fiddling around, and you might need to do a bit of searching to get it to work. So those are your options on emulators. Not so straightforward as with a lot of machines, but it is doable, and when you get it going, it is fun. And most things will work. You know, like I was using Amiga on here, and I'm using it with my PlayStation 4 controller. So when we were playing games in the week, what did I play? I played Stunt Car Racer with the gamepad. That worked fine. I was playing Alien Breed with the gamepad as well, and that was working fine as well. Sometimes you need to remember there'll be a checkbox where you say keep the keyboard connected, because otherwise it'll disconnect the keyboard. So when I was playing Alien Breed, I couldn't get to the terminal because I couldn't get the terminals to work in it because I needed to press space and it disconnected the keyboard, which is kind of annoying. But if you've got that working, obviously you've got your keyboard and mouse that you can also use as normal with the games that require mouse, which is really, really cool as well. Now, the other alternative is that you can just get yourself an Amiga. You can go and find yourself an Amiga 500 or a 600 or whatever it is that you fancy. This is a 500 plus. And I have modded this one, and it is quite a simple modification. I've actually removed the hard drive on this, and I've got something in here called a Gotek, which is sort of like, think of it like open source hardware, if you like. So lots of people make Goteks. I've got a little 3D printed thing on the top here with a dial, and basically it comes with some software in there called Flash Floppy. And you go in Flash Floppy, and you basically, what you do is you tell it there's a whole bunch of slots in there, and you basically tell the disk, you tell the system which game disk you want on what slot, and then you basically select them here. So as far as the Amiga is concerned, every time you turn this little dial on the top, it's inserting another disk into the machine, and you get a little simulated disk noise. So the Amiga knows no different, but the advantage is that you get this little USB stick here that you can use with, you can put the entire Amiga library on there as well if you want to, and you just tell it what ones to put where, go onto this and select it. Now I haven't explained that very well, and there's loads and loads of videos out there, really good videos for how to install a Gotek, but it is actually, I found this really, really easy. You literally replace, if you can find one, replace the whole tray for the floppy drive. There's usually instructions with it depending on who you buy it from. Comes with this little thing here with some ribbon cables that connect through, basically through the cooling vents on the top, and then it just provides you with a USB port at the side that you can pop your USB stick in with all your game images on, whether they're ADFs or WHDs. Difference between those: ADFs, floppy disks; WHDs are hard drive images, which are better but more difficult to find, I find typically. So that is your option. You can get yourself an old Amiga and do it, and to be honest with you, that is where I've been doing most of my gaming, on the old Amiga, because it is a joy. I've got my joystick and I've got the mouse, where the left button is a little bit difficult to click, but when I'm playing on any game, just playing it on here just feels so authentic and fantastic compared to playing it on the emulator. So I do really enjoy playing games actually directly on the Amiga. And if I was an Amiga enthusiast, oh yeah, I am. But if you were an Amiga enthusiast, get yourself an Amiga. Go find yourself an Amiga. There are some things to watch though. You need to make sure that it has been recapped. It has a known problem, and this is a problem that I had with my machine, which is that one of the capacitors in them can leak and cause lots and lots of damage to the board. So make sure it's been recapped and works well. And the hard drive as well, which you can't quite see, which is behind me over here, has also been recapped as well. So you buy one that's been refurbished. If you buy one that's just been found in an attic, which is, I got mine out of an attic, it's been sitting there for years, chances are it won't work, or it won't work for very long. You'll know because you'll switch it on, and if one of those capacitors is due to go, it'll go and you'll smell it and it'll stink, and you'll need to get it repaired quickly, because otherwise the stuff inside the capacitor will damage all of the board, and you'll need an expensive job to put it right. So but yeah, you can find yourself an Amiga and do that. Now the other option, the final option, is to get yourself a reimagined Amiga. Now this is an Amiga 500 Mini. These are actually quite expensive now, but you can still find them. And this is Retro Games Limited version of it. Unfortunately, the keyboard doesn't work on it, which means that you will need a keyboard if you want to play other games on it. It comes with games that are typically joypad or joystick friendly, so you don't need to worry too much about that. But it does allow you to sideload games using the USB ports on the back. If you do that, you will probably also need to plug a keyboard into one of the other ports, and probably a mouse as well, because you'll find that a lot of the games require keyboard or mouse input more often than not. So you will find that you might need to do a little bit of have a little bit of an additional setup for that, which is a little bit of a nuisance. What I would suggest is a keyboard that uses maybe a little dongle and maybe just a mini keyboard that you can have near you or something like that might be a good idea. So that is one option. And in December of this year, Retro Games are also launching the Amiga 1200. It's called the Amiga 1200 in the same way this is called the 500 Mini. And that will be a reimagined 1200 with a full-size keyboard on it, with mouse and everything else. This does come with a mouse. I should have pointed that out. This does also come with a mouse. So that, I think, if you are thinking about getting one of these, I'd almost be tempted to wait, because I think you get the Amiga 1200 at Christmas time, you'll be able to plug in the USB stick and play pretty much anything you want. And I think I believe there are some CD32 games that are coming on that as well, pretty much the same hardware. So I think that's going to be a real good one. I think they're retailing on pre-order for about £170, so it's quite a lot of money. I suspect that will probably come down, but I'm very excited to get mine. I think that's probably going to be the way that I'm going to be playing most of my Amiga games in the future, rather than hooking all of this up and maybe letting this have a little bit of a rest after years of good service. So there you go. Those are your broad options for playing Amiga games. Of course, there are also lots and lots of ports as well of games. You know, you'll find some of the Bitmap Brothers games, things like that. You know, things like Speedball 2. You'll find some of those on things like the Evercade cartridges, and of course there are lots of ports of games on things like the SNES and the Mega Drive as well. Things like Sensible Soccer, stuff like that, which play pretty good on those machines as well. You'll also find those there. So if there's certain games that I've mentioned today, sometimes it's worth having a look at the port. Sometimes the ports are rubbish. I think Lemmings is only really any good on a machine that's got a mouse, for instance. So if you try and play that on anything else, I generally find it's a bit of a nuisance. So PC or Atari ST is going to be your best bet there. And if you're going to go to the effort of buying an Atari ST and you already have one, I'll just go and buy an Amiga, or both if you're lucky enough. So there you go. That is how you can get back into Amiga gaming in 2026. Let's now get on to the final verdict of what it has been like to live with the Amiga for the last 4 weeks, and I will also reveal to you what the console is for next month. Let's get into my final thoughts and verdict right now. Right then, we are in the final stretch. It's been a long video. I told you there was lots to cover. So what has it been like to live with the Amiga 500 for the last 4 weeks? Well, it's been great. I've loved it. As if you needed to be told, as if I needed to tell you. If you've been watching any of these videos over the last few weeks, you'll already know that. Now, as I've mentioned to you before, my journey with the Amiga was a little unorthodox. I didn't own one myself. I just spent a lot of time playing on my friend's Amiga. And actually, looking at the comments, that's what a lot of people have done. It's not a lot of people I've seen in the comments really wished they owned an Amiga but never did, and then they played on their friends' ones, which was quite interesting. I thought maybe I was, you know, I almost didn't have the qualifications to talk about Amiga as a fan of the platform when I didn't even own one. And as I mentioned before, you know, I know people that owned Ataris. I know people that owned a 3DO. I know someone that owned a 3DO. I know people that owned a lot of other tech at the time, and for me, the Amiga was always my favourite. You know, regardless of what hardware was under the hood, as I've already mentioned, you know, that the 3DO and platforms like that, but also my PC that I had at home was significantly more powerful than the Amiga. But the Amiga just had something about it, some magic about it that I couldn't quite put my finger on, and I just liked it. And many of you say, oh yeah, Andy's a fanboy, Andy's an Amiga fanboy. Maybe I am. But the point here is that it's not about the hardware or anything else like that. It's about how it made you feel. It's about what that hardware made you feel, the games that you played and how enjoyable they were and how much fun they had. I have so many happy memories of playing on the Amiga with my friends. You know, there'd be a few of us that would go around to my friend's house and we'd all play, and we'd take it in turns, and we'd do co-ops, and we'd play Sensible Soccer and all of those kind of things. And it just was a special time. And the games on the Amiga made it special. They were just fantastic. And we do other things on there as well because it was creative. We might do a bit of music, or we might draw some pictures or whatever. But you know, it was special. It was a special machine. And you know, yeah, okay, so many of you go, yes, but it only had 4 channels, and yes, the 68,000 wasn't really that groundbreaking by the mid 1980s. Yeah, sure, I agree. But the point is, all of that together was the sum of its parts was more It was just more, and I loved it. And coming back to it some 40 years later, I still love it, and I've really enjoyed playing the games that I've played. Probably the highlights for me: Lemmings, Cannon Fodder, Speedball 2. Yeah, those are probably my favourites that I've come back and played. Alien Breeds, yeah, I mean, I have enjoyed all of it. There hasn't been a game that I've played that I've not enjoyed, and I've really enjoyed it, and I've wanted to play more. I just haven't had the time. So yeah, for me, it has been a fantastic month with, and I am sad to be putting the Amiga back into storage now. I don't have room for it here on my desk. I just don't. So I need to kind of clear some space. But I'm really sad about it because, you know, I've really enjoyed playing it, but I've also really loved the engagement. As I said at the beginning of the video, I've loved the engagement from the community as well. So many people with so many fabulous memories, and just the testament to the Amiga is just how popular my videos have been. More popular than any other platform I've talked about at any point over the last 2 years. The Amiga has been head and shoulders above everything else that I've talked about. It's been so popular. The engagement has been massive. So thank you so much for that. But it's also quite sad that I've now got to move on. So there we go. That is it. That is the month we've done for the Amiga 500 and, well, and the Amiga generally. It has been an absolute blast, and I've loved it, and I am definitely going to be playing some more Amiga games. And later on in the year, when the 1200 arrives, I will be doing a month with that. But obviously it'll be slightly different because it'll be reimagined and it'll be a newer machine, so we'll be talking about it slightly differently. But I am looking forward to getting back and doing some more serious Amiga gaming later on in the year, although I am not going to stop between now and December, that is for sure. Okay, right then, so I guess the question everybody's now asking, well, okay, maybe you're not all asking it, maybe you've all signed off and got bored, but if there's anybody left, there is a question that a few people are asking, which is what is coming up next? Right, okay, drum roll please. This is a console, and this is a console that I think doesn't have much love, and it is a significant console in the history of consoles. That console is this machine here. Help if I turn it the right way around. This is the Sega Dreamcast, and it is the last of Sega's hardware consoles. It's the last bit of hardware that Sega ever made, and I think it's a little bit unloved. I think this is a great console, and it was a victim of lots of problems. We've talked about Commodore being a problem and, you know, marketing things badly and confusing the market and all those kind of things. Well, Sega did that. Sega did that a lot as well, and we'll be talking about that through the month, why this was their last console, why it didn't succeed. But actually, I think it's a great little bit of kit, and there's some fantastic games on here which we're going to be playing on the Bit Between throughout the month of July. So yes, the Sega Dreamcast is our month with for July, and I'm very excited to be getting stuck in with this machine. How I'm going to get it hooked up, I'm not sure, because it's got I can do VGA and a whole bunch of other things. It's also got network capability, although we won't be making much use of that. So yes, we'll be making use of this very late 90s console, so it's a bit of a leap forward in terms of technology, but I am super excited to be getting stuck in with this, and I'm really excited to be playing some Crazy Taxi because I freaking love that game. So there we go, Dreamcast for July. And that is really all of the now and next, because that's what we're going to be doing. So we're going to be doing a few features on Sega, and you know, its history in some ways is not entirely dissimilar to Commodore's, except Sega managed to survive, thank goodness, but not as a hardware manufacturer anymore. So yeah, we'll be talking about all of that, and like I say, we'll also be playing a whole bunch of games as well. So that is it for this week and for the month with this month. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you do enjoy these videos, please hit that like and subscribe button. Thank you very much for doing so. All of those people who have already done that in their droves this month. It's been amazing. So thank you again for about the 17th time. You'd probably tell I am genuinely grateful. Yes, obviously hit that bell icon as well to get any notifications, but probably just leaves me to say thank you all for watching. Please do all take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.